Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. My guest today on Wichita Liberty TV is Anita MonCrief. On her Facebook page, she describes herself as blogger, writer, wife, mom, Acorn whistleblower, ex-liberal, and DC troublemaker, specializing in political commentary and snark. Now she is Grassroots trainer and curriculum consultant for Americans for Prosperity, an advisory board member of the Black Conservatives Fund, and former senior advisor for True the Vote, but she's best known as the Acorn whistleblower. Anita attended the University of Alabama, where she majored in political science and history. She's in Wichita this week on behalf of Americans for Prosperity, and she stopped by the Wichita Liberty TV studios. Let's watch my interview with Anita MonCrief. Anita MonCrief, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. You're best known as the Acorn whistleblower, and I think those events happened, more than just a couple years ago, and many of our viewers may not recall what was Acorn, what was the whole deal about, how did you get involved? So if you could, please tell us about Acorn and your involvement, and why did you turn against it?
Well, I started working at Acorn in 2005, and I don't know if many people were aware of what Acorn was like before the scandal, but back then they had this website and they were out there talking about helping people, and they had pictures of people with their fist in the air, and it was like, we're empowering communities, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to help people. I wanted to stop poverty. I wanted to, have people with better living conditions than what I was seeing. So I joined Acorn. I was from Alabama, and when I took the job, I moved to Washington, D.C., right there off Capitol Hill. And when I started out, everything was great. I was working in the communities. I was doing protests. I was protesting in front of the Federal Reserve and all of these things. And I tell people, if you stay at Acorn long enough, you got to go watch because the turnover was so bad. And the longer I stayed, I realized they weren't fighting to end poverty. The money was in the fight. And as long as they told people that they were trying to help these folks, they were raking in millions of dollars, and they were using it for partisan political purposes.
So this money that was coming in, was that money from the government or money from private donors?
Both. They had government grants, they had HUD grants, they had these community revitalization grants, all of this. And then they were getting money from the likes of George Soros and Barbara Streisand and Herb and Marion Sandler, who helped cause the housing collapse. They were all giving millions of dollars to this organization. The private donors knew that they were out there trying to collect power in these different locations by getting people elected, but the federal government supposedly didn't know what was going on with Acorn. They thought it was a good organization.
And then as the 2000 election campaign got going, that's when I think people became more aware of Acorn. Is that right?
Exactly. They had been doing shenanigans in the elections for years, but in 2008, that's when it really finally came to a head. They were doing things like registering Mickey Mouse to vote and flooding the election offices across the country with ineligible voters, and it was all in an attempt to not only cause chaos, but to make sure that their guy, Obama, got elected, and people started paying attention.
So it was really a purposeful thing? They just weren't innocently registering people? They were doing it with the intent of fouling the system? Is that it?
Yes. When I was there, one of the things that they took into account is that if they waited to the very last moment and pushed all of these cards on the election offices, the people there are actually trying to do good. So instead of disenfranchise a voter, they would let all of those people on the rolls and try to figure it out after the election. But when you flood the system like that, it allows for dead people to vote, voter impersonation, and all of the things that we saw. And they registered 7 million people between 2004 and 2008, well above the margin of victory needed to win.
So there were some problems with Acorn. What eventually happened? You testified in front of Congress about these matters,
yes.
Didn't you?
Well, what happened is that in 2007, I had been at Acorn for, 2.5 years at that point, and I was called into my supervisor's office. They gave me a USB drive that was about this big, and on that USB drive was Obama's 2007 donor list for second quarter. Now, this was the list that was more complete than what he gave the FEC, because if you remember, he didn't have to turn in anything under $200. So they gave this list to me. They told me to contact the maxed out presidential donors and and tell them that they could give to Acorn, and Acorn was going to get Obama elected. And I had looked the other way on a lot of things that were going on in the organization because I was a hard left, liberal, radical person that was just angry at the system. But this to me was wrong. And I thought that Obama was a good guy and that Acorn was going to get in there and use him for their own purposes. So that's why I blew the whistle.
So you think that the organizers at Acorn, the leadership or whatever, did they know that they were doing wrong, but they thought that the goal of getting Barack Obama elected president was, the ends justifying the means?
I don't even think they saw it as wrong. The organizers at the top were the people that were controlling the strings in the communities, and they had people like myself, which they called true believers, that were out there getting the people involved and getting them motivated. But I don't think it was just about the ends justify the means. It was just that the moral compass was so skewed at that point that it was like anything goes, and so they acted like it was normal. And that's what scared me the most, is that this was not something that was ever discussed as being wrong. This was like, this is how we do it.
I see. And as a result of the hearings and your involvement in the testimony, what happened to Acorn after that time?
Well, it was a little crazy. I had testified in court in Pennsylvania at first, and then in 2009 I testified before Congress. They sued me for $5 million, and then, as many of you may know, that's when Andrew Breitbart stepped in and with the Acorn scandal and made them a household name to where people understood how subversive they were. And eventually they filed for bankruptcy. My lawsuit was dismissed, and we've seen them go underground and pop up in new organizations across the country. If you look at what's happening with the minimum wage protests that are going on, Acorn New York is behind that under another name. Same thing with some of the immigration things that you're seeing as well.
And I think we know that some of the donors you mentioned, like George Soros, are still very heavily involved in politics today, I think.
Exactly. And all they did, because they didn't go after the people and just the organization, the people have regrouped and they're out there doing the same thing. So it's like we're going to have the same situation in a couple of years, because since they've been underground, they've been amassing power, resources, and more people.
Now, we're told here in Kansas, we've had some reform in our voter laws over the past couple of years. About 2 years ago, you started to have to present a photo ID when you go to vote. Most commonly would be a driver's license. This year, you start to have to prove citizenship when you register to vote. A birth certificate would probably be the thing for most people. There are people in Kansas that criticize these laws as being disproportionately targeted against minority voters. What's your opinion about that?
I have to laugh because it is honestly insulting. When people tell me things like, oh, these laws are set to keep blacks from voting, it goes under the premise that blacks don't have IDs, we don't have birth certificates, we're not fully assimilated into society, we don't hold jobs, we don't travel. You need an ID for all of these things. You need to be able to prove citizenship for work purposes too. When I get a job, they ask me for my Social Security card. I mean, these are things that we have in order to be productive members of the society. So in order to say that African Americans don't have these things and that it's going to keep us from voting, not only is it insulting, but it's not a reality. It's the same thing that we see anytime there's illegal activity going on with these type of groups. They always point to, oh, you're racist. You don't want black people to vote. So you're looking over here defending yourself, and they're moving over here doing all types of illegal shenanigans using the black community as a shield. And now that, a Latino or Hispanic is the new black, now they're using the Hispanic or Latino community to do the same thing. They always need a victim, and that victim is a shield for their criminal activity.
It's very interesting. Let's take a moment off for a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll pick up on this topic again. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week is Anita MonCrief. So, before the break, we were talking about the more restrictive voter laws in Kansas, photo ID, proof of citizenship upon registering, and the criticism that these are targeted against minority voters. But you're saying that's really not the case, and I think you pointed to Georgia as an example.
Yes, in Georgia, minority participation actually increased after photo ID was enacted. And that's because traditionally there are a lot of shenanigans that happen in minority communities, so people start to feel that their vote doesn't count or it doesn't matter. So once photo ID was enacted, people did come out in droves because they felt like finally their voice could make a difference.
They had more confidence confidence in the system, you think?
Exactly.
That's interesting. In Wichita, there's a woman in Wichita, a friend of mine that I admire. She's a black woman. She's a conservative. She's run for the Kansas Senate several times as a Republican in district that is that encompasses many of Wichita's minority neighborhoods. Now, she says when she walks door to door campaigning, talking to black and African American families, explaining conservative values, they often end up saying, you know, that's what I believe. But still, they end up voting for Democrats. Can you explain that phenomenon?
Well, I think I look at my own upbringing. I came up as a black Catholic in the South. I tell people all the time, Jesus and JFK, that was the two pictures on our wall. You know, from the time I was born, we were Democrats. That was the only thing that people told us. And even though my grandfather was a veteran who lost his sight in World War II, even though we had strong family values, we were gun lovers and everything, we still voted against our values. It's because somewhere along the line, the liberals and the Democrat Party hijacked what it meant to be black, and they put it to where if you come outside of the party, then you're not black enough. I've had people tell me that all the time. You're Uncle Tom, you're Aunt Jemima, you're whatever. So it's a desire to fit in and not be outside the norm. And for some reason, the Democrats are the ones that say they help people. And so many blacks think that if you're poor, then that's the way you vote. And one of the things that helped liberate me is when I heard Condoleezza Rice speak. And she said, I wake up every single day and I am black. She said, no one can take that away from me. And it clicked in my head that I didn't have to vote a certain way. I didn't have to do a certain thing. There's nothing that defines a race by your political beliefs. And I think that we have to stop it. I call them cultural slave catchers, people of our own race that pull us back in line when we get outside of that. We've seen it with Samuel L. Jackson. We've seen it with Morgan Freeman and a host of other celebrities that want people to all, vote the same way and to, get in line because that's what you're supposed to do.
And I think some black conservatives I personally know, like Star Parker, for example, she's been in Wichita several times speaking to us, and she's very roundly criticized for her beliefs. I think she calls it for not fitting in on the plantation or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how that metaphor works out. And I think Jason Riley is another prominent black conservative, a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. He has a new book out that I've not read, but it's called something like Please Stop Helping Us or something like that. Do you know anything about that book or what he's talking about?
I have not heard about it, but I know exactly what he's talking about. It was, I'll give you a little anecdote here. There was an episode of Maude. You remember Maude?
Yes, I do.
Where Florida Evans was on there. And, Maude was going through her whole liberal phase at that time. So she kept trying to get Florida Evans, from Good Times. She had interviewed as her maid to be angry. She felt like she wasn't an angry black person and she needed to be fighting for justice and whatever. And Florida Evans was like, man, Lord, please help us from these well-meaning white people. And it was just so funny when you think about it, because that paternalistic attitude is exactly what you see from the radical left. They feel like, oh, you can't do it without us. We're here to help you. We're going to guide you. So they go into these communities and their help actually has destroyed the community. When I look at the Great Society, it looks like people dropped a bomb in these communities and left. And it's all because they were trying to help.
And I think that two economists that I admire, Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell, for years, both of those men are about 75 years old, so they're of a generation quite a bit beyond us. But they talk about how before the Great Society that black families were becoming more prosperous, that the rates of illegitimate children were low and declining, but then the Great Society programs came and things have gotten worse since then.
You are exactly right. Is when you look at the people that march with dignity in their three-piece suits and their church clothes for freedom, and then you look at what happened after that, it was systematic, and they did it on purpose. When you look at the rise of the riots and stuff, do you remember when all of those riots were happening in the late 60s? You know what else was coming up at the very same time? Saul Alinsky, community organizing, the agitators, Weather Underground, Bill Ayers. These people were out there agitating in the black community, telling them that, what? The peaceful protest didn't work. Martin Luther King is dead. We're going to fight. We're going to take back, our rights and our freedom. So people destroyed their communities. They looted. They did all of these things. And they taught black people that the only way to enact social change was through destruction. And that's what you saw in Ferguson. That's what you see every time there's a major issue. And it's not right, but those were the people that were profiting off of the destruction of these communities.
Well, thank you, Anita. We'll take another couple minutes off for commercial messages, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, this week with Anita MonCrief. And Anita, we've been talking about race relations, and I have to confess that as a white man, I am really not comfortable talking about matters of race and ethnicity. Our mayor in Wichita is a black man about my age, and I oppose many of his policies because they are liberal policies, I believe, that are bad for our city. But from time to time, people say, Bob, the only reason why you oppose Carl Brewer is because he is black and you are white. So let me ask you this. What should be the goal of race relations in America? Should we try to eliminate or reduce differences between the races? Are there even differences between the races, or should we recognize the differences and celebrate them? That's a mouthful, but that's a question.
You know what? I'm glad you asked me that, because that is something that's a particular passion of mine. People need to understand that, yes, there are differences between the races. There are cultural differences. There are different expectations. There's communication differences. But until we understand and talk about those things, we cannot move past them, because you know what? We have more in common than we have differences. We have more. The human experience doesn't change between the races. We all want to be loved. We all want to take care of our families. We want to have a good life. When you talk about prosperity and individual liberties and freedoms, that should be for everyone. You should not be, because of your zip code or because of your status, be denied to have well-being and to be happy. So when I talk to people, I tell them, you know what? We're all in this together. Talk to people honestly, like you would talk to your neighbor or your friend. People come up to me and they ask me, Anita, and they look around. It's like, how do I talk to black people? And I'm like, there's no magic formula. There's no special word. Just, say hello, say hi, and start that conversation. Because you know what? A divided country where we're fighting and looking everywhere else, we're not paying attention to what's really going on. And I will tell you something else. One of the things that I realized when I came over to this movement, I had all of these preconceived notions. Oh, you're racist, you're angry, you hate, poor people and whatever else. But the conservatives and liberty-minded people are their own best asset, and they don't even realize it, because the kindness and love and compassion and willingness to guide me as an angry liberal was worth more than any of all those chips I had on my shoulder. They melted away. I didn't have any control over it because I was pulled in.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of leads to another question I have. Is part of the problem is that government is too big and tries to do too much? In other words, if government was limited to protecting our lives and liberties, would we have less to fight about between not only the races, but between liberals and conservatives and other groups?
I think so. What the government has done through all of these social programs and handouts, they have put people's survival, and they have vested that in the government. So in order to feed your kids, in order to keep your house, in order to keep all of these things that the government is providing you, you have to vote for that larger government, because they tell you, if we take that away, your kids will starve. You won't have a home. So when people are looking at it, they're not looking at it for political reasons. They're looking at it as, oh, I don't want them to take away this. Well, how am I going to feed my kids? Mm-hmm. So we have to stop having all of these social programs. I'm not saying remove the safety nets completely, but in order for people to prosper, they have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And we need to talk about it in those terms. And, having a legacy of prosperity for their children. And we don't convey that. We don't communicate that effectively.
Because I think many people do, I think, as you mentioned, support a social safety net, but they cringe sometimes when they see families, and these are black, white, Hispanic families that are on welfare generation after generation, and they see that as not a good thing at all.
Exactly. I came up on social programs. We had welfare, we had food stamps, so we had the government cheese, and I remember when they had food in a can, like like pork and stuff they would give you. And I was so embarrassed and I hated it. This is back when they had the paper food stamps. And I told myself I would never live like this once I became an adult. So I pushed myself through education in order to come out of it. There is nothing wrong with having private charity and having something for people when they need it. But this should not be the end-all be-all to put everyone. When I was at Acorn, they wanted everyone to sign up for food stamps, no matter what. At my daughter's school, when I was in Maryland, they wanted everyone to be on the free lunch program. It's just one of those things where the government has gotten too involved in our lives. And as they say, a government that will give you everything can also take it away.
Yeah, that's right. So do you think that, am I cynical in thinking that politicians, let's say Barack Obama, they want more people to be dependent on government social welfare programs? Is that how they gain their political power?
I always laugh because when you think about it and you look at the radical left, John Fund said it, I can explain it this way. He said when a conservative or Republican loses, they go back to the private sector. When a Democrat loses, they don't have a job. Because everything that the radical left has done is tied into this government infrastructure. And if you take that away, they won't have jobs. All the people that are saying they're out there fighting for poverty, their gravy train will go away. Every single issue has some nonprofit that's collecting millions of dollars, and they're getting government subsidies and grants. So everything is built around a large, engorged federal government, and it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and on the other side, the corporate welfare side, every tax break, every subsidy program has the corporate lobbyists in favor of that too.
Exactly.
So boy, it's a mess, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Now, Anita, you work for Americans for Prosperity, and you're here in Wichita based upon that. What is your job with AFP? What are the type of things that you bring to AFP?
I'm a grassroots trainer and curriculum consultant, and one of the things that I'm doing right now, and I'm so excited about, is that we are doing the type of grassroots training that is needed right now, because we have activists out there that need to understand it's not about politics, it's not about left or right, it's about the issues and connecting to people. So we're teaching people how to connect, how to build communities, and how to communicate freedom in a way that pulls everyone in.
Well, that's very interesting. Well, Anita, I very much appreciate you appearing on the show. I think we're about out of time, so welcome to Wichita Liberty,
Thank
Anita,
you.
And good luck to you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you back here again next week for Wichita Liberty TV.